The sound was not a crack. It was a thunderclap. In the middle of the crowded Hamilton County courthouse, a corrupt detective, a man who thought he owned the law, made the biggest mistake of his life. He did not just strike a woman. He struck a decorated military police officer. Detective Barrett Voss thought his badge gave him the right to slap Nia Caldwell across the face for disrespecting him. He expected fear. He expected tears. What he got was a lesson in physics. 1 second later, Voss was staring at the ceiling lights, knocked out cold before his body even hit the floor. But the knockout was just the beginning. What they found in his pockets while he was unconscious would tear the entire city apart. This is the story of the slap heard around the world and the karma that followed. The air conditioning in courtroom 4B had been broken, and by afternoon, the atmosphere was less like a hall of justice and more like a pressure cooker. The humidity of the Georgia summer clung to the walls, making the wood paneling look darker, slicker, and more oppressive. Judge Donovan Reyes sat on the bench, fanning himself with a manila folder. His face flushed a deep, unhealthy red. He was a man who preferred quick pleas and early lunches, not the drawn-out torture of a police misconduct hearing. But today, the gallery was packed. Every seat was taken, and the overflow spilled into the hallway. Sitting in the witness box was Detective Barrett Voss. If you looked up arrogance in the dictionary, you would find Voss's mugshot. He was a large man, built like a linebacker, who had let himself go just enough to look imposing rather than athletic. He wore a tailored suit that cost more than a rookie cop's annual salary, and he chewed a piece of gum with a slow, rhythmic insolence that set everyone's teeth on edge. Voss was not just a cop in this town. He was an institution. He ran the narcotics division like his own private kingdom, and for years, nobody had dared to cross the moat. Until today. Sitting in the front row of the gallery, directly behind the defense table, sat a woman who did not fit the usual demographic of Voss's victims. She was tall, with posture so rigid she looked like she was carved from obsidian. She wore a simple navy blue blazer and slacks, but the way she held herself screamed uniform. This was Nia Caldwell. To the casual observer, she was just another concerned family member. But those who knew, really knew, saw the telltale signs, the calluses on her knuckles, the way her eyes constantly scanned the exits and the bailiff's holsters. Nia was not just a spectator. She was a sergeant major in the military police corps, a combat veteran with tours in the sandbox, and a specialist in internal investigations. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, watching the back of Barrett Voss's head with the intensity of a sniper waiting for the wind to die down. Detective Voss, the defense attorney, a weary but sharp public defender named Preston Hale, said. He adjusted his glasses, sweat beading on his forehead. "Let us go back to the night of the arrest. You stated in your report that you found the illicit substance in the glove box of the defendant's vehicle before you requested backup. Is that correct?" Voss smirked. He did not even lean toward the microphone. "That is what the report says, counselor. Can you not read?" A few snickers rippled through the back of the room. Voss's cronies, other officers who had come to show support, or perhaps intimidation. "I can read just fine, Detective," Hale said, his voice tightening. "But we have a time-stamped dispatch log that suggests you called for a tow truck before you claim to have found the drugs. Why call for a tow if you had not found a reason to arrest the driver yet?" Voss's chewing slowed. He shifted in the chair, the wood creaking under his weight. Intuition. "I have been on the job for years. I know a perp when I see one. I knew I was going to find something." "So, you decided the guilt before the evidence," Hale pressed. I decided I was not going to let a punk walk away with product in his car. Voss snapped, his voice rising. I keep these streets clean. Maybe you should try saying thank you instead of nitpicking timestamps. Judge Reyes cleared his throat. Detective, watch your tone. Answer the questions. Voss shot a glance at the judge, a look that bordered on insubordination. He knew where the judge's skeletons were buried. He knew who paid for the judge's lake house. The reprimand was just for show. Nia Caldwell did not blink. She watched Voss's hands. They were clenching and unclenching on the railing of the witness box. He was losing control. That was good. An angry man makes mistakes, and Nia was counting on him making a big one. She was not here for herself. She was here for Private First Class Cale Hayes, a young kid under her command who was currently sitting at the defense table, head bowed, terrified. Kyle had been driving home to visit his sick mother when Voss pulled him over. Kyle had no record, no drugs, and a spotless service history. But he had a nice car, and Voss did not like punks in nice cars. Now Kyle was facing years for possession of heroin. Heroin that Nia knew with absolute certainty Voss had planted. But proving it, that was the war, and the courtroom was the battlefield. The cross-examination dragged on. The heat in the room became suffocating. The air smelled of stale sweat and floor wax. Preston Hale, the public defender, was doing a better job than anyone expected. He was chipping away at Voss's armor, exposing the inconsistencies, the missing body cam footage, the magical appearance of evidence. "Detective," Hale said, pulling a piece of paper from his stack, "are you familiar with the term ghost dope?" Voss's eyes narrowed. The gum stopped moving entirely. "I do not know street slang, counselor." "It is not street slang, detective. It is a term used in internal affairs," Hale said, his voice gaining strength. "It refers to drugs confiscated from one crime scene that are never logged into evidence, but instead kept by the officer to plant on future suspects to justify an arrest." "Objection!" the prosecutor shouted, jumping up. "Speculation, badging the witness." "I am going to allow it," Judge Reyes said surprisingly. Even he could feel the mood in the room shifting. The audience was silent now. The tension was a physical weight. "I have never planted evidence in my life," Voss growled, leaning forward, his jaw tight, "and I resent the accusation from a cheap lawyer defending a drug-dealing soldier." At the mention of drug-dealing soldier, Nia Caldwell stood up. It was not a violent motion. It was smooth, controlled, and commanding. The sound of her chair legs scraping against the floor cut through the silence like a knife. Voss's eyes snapped to her. He had noticed her earlier. It was hard not to, but he had dismissed her. Now, standing at her full height, with shoulders squared, she looked dangerous. "Is there a problem in the gallery?" Judge Reyes asked, peering over his glasses. Nia spoke, her voice calm, but projecting to every corner of the room without shouting. "The defendant is a United States soldier with a spotless record, Your Honor. The only criminal in this room is the man in the witness box." The courtroom gasped. "Order." Reyes banged his gavel. "Ma'am, sit down, or I will have you removed." Voss laughed. It was a cruel barking sound. "Let her talk, Judge. It is probably the girlfriend, or maybe the sister. They all stick together, do they not?" The racial undertone was unmistakable. The air in the room seemed to drop degrees. Nia did not flinch. She stepped out of the row and moved into the aisle. The bailiff, a young deputy named Rocco Vance, looked at her uncertainly. He sensed authority radiating off her and hesitated to grab her. "I am Sergeant Major Nia Caldwell, 11th Military Police Battalion," she said, locking eyes with Voss. "And I am here to formally testify that on the night of the arrest, Detective Voss's personal vehicle was tracked via GPS to a known narcotics distribution hub before he pulled over Private Hayes." Voss's face went from red to purple. This was information nobody was supposed to have. The GPS data on his private car. That was impossible. Unless the feds were already watching him. "You are lying!" Voss shouted, standing up in the witness box. He pointed a thick finger at her. "Get this bitch out of my courtroom." "It is not your courtroom, detective," Nia said, taking a step closer to the bar that separated the gallery from the court floor. "And those GPS logs are already in the hands of the FBI." That was the trigger. Voss, fueled by adrenaline, fear, and a lifetime of unchecked power, lost his mind. He did not think. He reacted. He vaulted over the low swinging gate of the witness box, storming onto the floor of the courtroom. "I am sick of you people coming into my town and telling me how to do my job," Voss roared. The bailiff moved too late. The judge was hammering the gavel, shouting for order, but it was just noise. Voss charged toward the aisle where Nia stood. She did not retreat. She did not flinch. She simply widened her stance, her hands coming up to a defensive thinking man position. Open palms close to her face. Deceptive. Voss reached the wooden railing separating them. He was a big man, heavy and full of momentum. He reached over the rail, grabbing Nia by the lapel of her blazer with his left hand, yanking her forward. "You shut your mouth when you speak to the law," he screamed, spraying spit. And then he did it. With his right hand, he wound back and delivered a vicious open-handed slap across Nia's face. Crack. The sound was sickening. It echoed off the high ceilings. The entire courtroom froze in horror. A police officer had just physically assaulted a woman, a military official, in open court. Nia's head snapped to the side. "That is right. Know your place." Slowly. "That is right. Know your place." Slowly, Nia turned her head back to face him. Her expression had not changed, but her eyes were no longer human. They were cold, calculating, sharks. She wiped the blood from her lip with her thumb, looked at it, and then looked at Voss. "My turn," she whispered. Voss blinked. "What?" He never finished the word. The courtroom clock seemed to stop. Time became elastic, stretching out the moment after Voss's hand left Nia's face. Voss was still grinning, a feral, satisfied look of a bully who had just established dominance. He was close to her, his left hand still gripping her jacket, his body weight leaning over the railing. He was totally exposed. He was used to people shrinking away. He had zero defense for someone moving forward. Nia did not step back. She stepped in. It was not a barroom brawl punch. It was not a wild swing born of anger. It was pure, distilled military combatives. Muscle memory honed by years of repetitive drilling. In a motion almost too fast for the human eye to track, Nia's left hand came up, trapping Voss's wrist that was holding her jacket, locking his arm in place so he could not retreat. Simultaneously, her right hand opened. She did not make a fist. A fist could break against a skull like Voss's. She used the heel of her palm, a weapon harder than bone. She drove upward. The strike was compact, traveling less than inches, but it had the entire rotation of her hips and the driving force of her legs behind it. Thwack! The sound was entirely different from the slap. It was a dense, wet thud of impact. Nia's palm heel strike connected squarely with the underside of Detective Voss's jaw, right on the button. The force was catastrophic. It forced his head sharply upward and backward, jarring his spine and causing his brain to rattle violently inside his skull. Voss's eyes did not just roll back, they seemed to vanish entirely into his head. His grip on her jacket instantly went slack. The grin dissolved into a slack-jawed mask of oblivion. Nia stepped back smoothly, releasing his wrist. For one surreal second, Detective Barrett Voss, the terror of the Hamilton County streets, stood perfectly upright, unconscious on his feet. Then gravity claimed him. He fell like a condemned building. He did not crumple. He tipped over, rigid as a board. He hit the linoleum floor of the courtroom aisle face first, with a sickening crash that shook the defense table. He did not move. He did not twitch. He just lay there, a mountain of expensive suit and corrupt flesh, face down between the pews. The silence that fell over courtroom 4B was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of everyone's lungs. Judge Reyes stood frozen, his gavel hovering in midair. The prosecutor's jaw was literally hanging open. Preston Hale, the public defender, looked like he had just seen a magic trick. Nia Caldwell stood over the fallen detective. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a tissue, and dabbed the cut on her lip again. She looked up at the stunned judge, her voice calm, level, and utterly unmoved. "Your Honor, the witness assaulted a senior non-commissioned officer of the United States Army. I neutralized the threat. I request military police backup be called immediately to take this man into custody." Chaos erupted a split second later. It was pandemonium. "Bailiff, secure the room. Get medical." Judge Reyes was screaming, banging his gavel furiously, though nobody was listening to it anymore. Deputy Rocco Vance, the young bailiff who had hesitated earlier, now scrambled over the railing. He knelt beside the motionless form of Detective Voss, his face pale. "He is out cold, Judge." "Really cold," Vance shouted over the din of the gallery where people were standing on benches to get a better look. "Phones out, recording everything. Check his airway." "Turn him over," Reyes commanded, panic creeping into his voice. The last thing he needed was the city's top narc dying in his courtroom after getting dropped by a woman. Vance grabbed Voss's massive shoulder and hefted the dead weight onto his back. Voss's nose was bleeding heavily where it had smashed against the floor, and his breathing was a shallow, rattling snore. "Loosen his tie!" someone shouted. Deputy Vance, fumbling with adrenaline, reached for Voss's neck to loosen the silk tie. In his haste, he snagged the lapel of Voss's suit jacket, jerking it open wildly. Voss had been carrying a lot of things in that jacket: his spare magazine for his Glock, a pack of gum, and something else. As the jacket flapped open, an object dislodged from an interior pocket. It slid out across the slick silk lining and tumbled onto the courtroom floor, spinning before coming to rest right at the feet of Preston Hale, the defense attorney. It was a clear plastic sandwich bag. Inside were small, tightly wrapped aluminum foil bindles. The room went silent again, but this was a different kind of silence. This was not shock at violence. This was the sickening realization of truth. Preston Hale stared at the bag. He did not touch it. He slowly looked up at the judge, then at the prosecutor. "Your Honor," Hale said, his voice shaking with fury, pointing a trembling finger at the bag on the floor. "That looks exactly like the packaging of the heroin allegedly found in my client's car." The prosecutor, a woman who had worked with Voss for years, looked like she was going to be sick. She took a step forward, stared at the bag, and retreated as if it were radioactive. Nia Caldwell walked over. She stood over the bag, looking down. "Ghost dope," Nia said, her voice cutting through the room. "He was carrying his supply. He probably planned to plant some more on me if I did not back down." Suddenly, the back doors of the courtroom burst open. 4 uniformed military police officers, wearing armbands and carrying sidearms, marched in with precision. They had been waiting in the hall on standby per Nia's orders before she even entered the courtroom. They moved directly to Nia, saluting crisply. "Sergeant Major, are you secure?" The lead MP barked. "I am," Nia said, returning the salute, blood still staining her lip. She pointed to the unconscious heap on the floor and then to the bag of drugs next to him. "That man assaulted me, and it appears he just dropped his personal stash of evidence on the floor of a court of law. Secure the scene. Nobody touches that bag until the FBI arrives. I already called them." Judge Reyes looked at the MPS taking over his courtroom, looked at the unconscious detective, looked at the drugs, and realized his career was likely over. The karma had not just hit Detective Voss. It had just leveled the entire building. But as Voss began to groan, groggy, trying to figure out why the ceiling lights were spinning, he had no idea that the worst was yet to come. Consciousness returned to Detective Barrett Voss, not as a light, but as a throbbing red-hot spike driven through the center of his skull. His first sensation was the smell of floor wax and dust pressing against his cheek. On shaking arms. The room spun violently on shaking arms. The room spun violently. His jaw felt unhinged. He tried to speak, to bark an order, but all that came out was a garbled slur. "What? Who hit?" "Stay down, detective," a deep voice commanded. It was not the judge. It was not his partner. Voss blinked the blurriness from his eyes and looked up. He was not looking at friendly faces. He was looking at the polished black boots of 4 military police officers forming a perimeter around him. Beyond them, the courtroom gallery was a sea of raised smartphones, recording his humiliation in high definition. "Get off me!" Voss spat, trying to scramble to his knees. "I am a police officer. Who struck me? I want her arrested for assault on a—" "You are not the victim here, Mr. Voss." The voice of Nia Caldwell cut through the fog in his brain. She was standing outside the circle of MPS, looking down at him with the cold detachment of a coroner examining a corpse. Voss followed her gaze. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the floor just inches from his left hand. Voss looked down. There, glistening under the fluorescent lights, was the sandwich bag. Foil bindles, heroin, the ghost dope he had carried in his breast pocket for years, his insurance policy, his tool for framing anyone who dared to drive a nice car in the wrong neighborhood. The color drained from Voss's face so fast it looked like he had died again. He instinctively reached for it, a desperate, lizard-brain reaction to hide the evidence. Click. A heavy boot stomped down on his hand, pinning it to the floor. It was not Nia. It was a man in a dark gray suit who had just entered, flanked by 3 tactical agents wearing windbreakers emblazoned with 3 yellow letters, FBI. "Do not touch the evidence, Marker," the man in the suit said smoothly. Voss looked up, squinting through the pane. He recognized the man. Special Agent Rocco Vance, Internal Corruption Task Force. Voss had spent years avoiding Vance, mocking him at police bars, calling him a Fed suit. Now Vance was standing over him like the Grim Reaper. Vance. Voss wheezed. "This is a setup. That woman, she planted it on me when she hit me. We have 4 angles of video from the gallery that show it falling out of your pocket, Barrett," Vance said, crouching down so their faces were level. "And we have the GPS data Sergeant Major Caldwell provided. And we have the fact that you just assaulted a decorated federal officer in open court." Vance stood up and nodded to the MPS. "Get him up." The MPS hoisted Voss to his feet. He swayed, his legs like jelly. He looked toward the bench, seeking salvation. "Judge Donovan," Voss pleaded, his voice cracking. Tell them this is your courtroom. You cannot let them do this." Judge Donovan Reyes was pale, wiping sweat from his forehead with a trembling hand. He looked at Agent Vance, then at the cameras, then at Voss. He saw the sinking ship, and he made the only choice a rat makes. The court has no jurisdiction over federal obstruction and assault charges. Reyes stammered, avoiding Voss's eyes. "The defendant, Mr. Voss, is remanded to federal custody. You traitorous coward!" Voss roared, lunging toward the bench, but the MPs wrenched his arms behind his back. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting tight was louder than the gavel had ever been. "Barrett Voss," Agent Vance announced, his voice carrying to the back of the room. "You are under arrest for possession of narcotics with intent to distribute, assault on a federal officer, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, and perjury. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it." As they marched Voss out of the courtroom, dragging him past the defense table, he locked eyes with PFC Cale Hayes, the young soldier he had tried to frame. Cale did not look scared anymore. He looked at Voss with pity. Court is adjourned. Judge Reyes banged the gavel, desperate to escape. "Not quite, Your Honor," Preston Hale, the public defender, shouted over the noise. "I move for immediate dismissal of all charges against my client, Cale Hayes, with prejudice." The prosecutor, seeing the radioactive fallout descending on her office, did not even stand up. The state withdraws the charges." "Case dismissed," Reyes mumbled, practically running for his chambers. Cale Hayes stood up, tears streaming down his face. He turned to Nia Caldwell. He did not know what to say. He just saluted. Nia softened just for a moment. She reached out and squeezed the young soldier's shoulder. "Go home to your mother, Private. Your war is over. Mine is just starting." The knockout in the courtroom was the splash. The arrest was the wave. But what happened next was a tsunami that drowned the corruption of Hamilton County. Detective Voss, sitting in a federal holding cell with a broken jaw wired shut and an ice pack on his head, thought he could ride it out. He thought he knew where the bodies were buried. He thought he had leverage. He was wrong. He had forgotten the first rule of karma. It always comes for your secrets. While Voss was being processed, Agent Vance and his team were executing a warrant on Voss's residence. It was a sprawling house in a gated community, a house that a detective's salary could not possibly afford. Nia Caldwell was there, acting as a liaison for the military interests in the case. She stood on the front lawn, watching the FBI team carry out boxes. "Sergeant Major," Agent Vance called out from the front door. "You need to see this." Nia walked inside. The house was gaudy, filled with expensive leather furniture and massive TVs, but Vance led her to the basement. Behind a false wall in the wine cellar, they found it. Voss's trophy room. It was not heads on the wall. It was paper. It was evidence. Voss was a hoarder of leverage. In a fireproof safe drilled open by the FBI techs, they found stacks of ledgers. They were not just about drug money. They were detailed logs of every favor he had done and every favor he was owed. "Look at this," Vance said, handing Nia a leather-bound notebook. She opened it. The handwriting was jagged and aggressive. Entries detailed: Judge Reyes, DUI cover-up, cost cash and dismissal of a case. Chief of Police, domestic dispute call at his mistress's apartment, buried the report. Owed promotion for Vance. Planted ounces of cocaine on Elwyn Banks, a teacher. She refused the date. ruined her. Nia's hands tightened on the book until the leather creaked. Elowin Banks. She remembered that story on the news, a beloved kindergarten teacher arrested for trafficking. She had lost her job, her license, her home. Everyone thought she had a secret life. It turned out she just said no to Barrett Voss at a bar. He kept receipts, Nia whispered, disgusted. He was blackmailing the whole system. He was the spider in the center of the web, Vance said grimly. But this book burns the web down. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The FBI raided the chambers of Judge Donovan Reyes. They found him packing a suitcase, cash stuffed into a gym bag. He was arrested in his driveway, weeping as the neighbors watched. The chief of police resigned, effective immediately due to health reasons, but was picked up by federal agents miles from the airport. But the hardest hit came from the digital forensics. Voss's phone, seized at the courthouse, contained a group chat. A chat named the Cleaning Crew. It included other narcotics officers. They shared photos of their victims, jokes about planting evidence, and bets on how much jail time they could get for innocent people. They mocked their victims. They called them trash, thugs, and ATMs. The Hamilton Seven were all in custody. The entire narcotics division was disbanded. Every case Barrett Voss had touched, convictions, was immediately suspended for review. The local news was running non-stop coverage. The video of Nia knocking out Voss had gone viral globally. It had millions of views. The hashtag The Slap became a symbol of resistance against corruption. But for Voss, sitting in his silent cell, the reality had not fully set in until his lawyer arrived. It was not a high-priced shark. It was a court-appointed defender, a young woman who looked at him with undisguised contempt. "Where is Gold? Where is my lawyer?" Voss mumbled through his wired jaw. "Mr. Gold dropped you as a client this morning, Mr. Voss," the young lawyer said, not sitting down. "All your assets have been frozen by the RICO Act. Your house, your cars, your pension, it is all gone. You cannot afford a private attorney." Voss stared at the gray wall. I have friends." "You have co-defendants," she corrected him, "and they are all cutting deals. Judge Reyes just signed a proffer. He is giving up everything on you to save his own skin. He says you masterminded the ring." Voss closed his eyes. The pain in his jaw was nothing compared to the sensation of the floor dropping out from under him. "You are facing years to life, Mr. Voss," she said. "And since you are a former cop, you will be serving that time in administrative segregation, solitary confinement, hours a day in a box for the rest of your life." Nia Caldwell, meanwhile, was back at the base. She was sitting in her office, looking at a photo of Elowin Banks, the teacher Voss had ruined. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she had found in the file. "Hello." A timid voice answered. "Ms. Banks, my name is Nia Caldwell. I have some news for you, and I think you are going to want to sit down for this. You are going to get your life back." The karma had circled back. The man who lived by destroying lives was about to watch his own life get dismantled brick by brick from inside a concrete box. But even Nia did not know that the final twist was waiting for Voss inside the prison walls, a twist that involved a face from his past he thought was long dead. Months had passed since the slap heard round the world, but for Barrett Voss, time had become a distorted, agonizing blur. The man who sat at the defendant's table in the Federal District Court of Georgia was a hollowed-out shell of the titan who used to rule Hamilton County. Gone were the Italian silk suits that cost a fortune. Gone was the gold Rolex that gleamed under streetlights. Gone even was the weight that made him physically imposing. Voss was now inmate number 89,402. At least that is what his wristband said, dressed in a drab, ill-fitting orange jumpsuit that smelled faintly of industrial detergent and other men's sweat. He had lost pounds. His skin, once flushed with the ruddy complexion of good bourbon and high blood pressure, was now a shallow, paste-like gray. His hair had thinned, revealing a scalp that glistened with a cold, nervous sweat. The courtroom was packed, just as it had been on that fateful day in the county court. But the atmosphere was entirely different. There was no humidity, no broken air conditioning. The federal courthouse was a temple of steel, glass, and freezing cold air. It felt sterile. It felt like an operating room where a tumor was about to be excised. Voss refused to look at the gallery. He knew who was there. He could feel their eyes burning into the back of his neck. Nia Caldwell was there, sitting in the front row, her posture as rigid and perfect as a statue. She wore her dress blues, her medals catching the courtroom lights, a visual reminder of the integrity Voss had lacked his entire career. Beside her sat Cale Hayes, the young man whose life Voss had tried to erase. And beside him was a woman Voss had tried desperately to forget. Elowen Banks, the kindergarten teacher, whose career he had torpedoed because she would not sleep with him. They were the ghosts of his past, flesh and blood, watching his funeral while he was still breathing. But the worst betrayal was not in the gallery. It was on the witness stand. Voss had watched in horror as the Hamilton Seven, his squad, his boys, the men he had protected, enriched, and drank with, took the stand one by one. They did not just testify. They eagerly dissected him to save their own skins, to shave years off their own sentences. They painted Voss as the mastermind, the puppet master, the devil himself. Detective Vance, the man Voss had promoted, the man whose mortgage Voss had helped pay, sat on the stand and wept fake tears. "I was afraid of him," Vance told the jury, avoiding Voss's death stare. "Barrett told us that if we did not plant the evidence, we would be the ones in cuffs. He ran the department like a mafia don. We were just soldiers following orders. It was a lie. They had all been greedy. They had all laughed at the thugs they framed. But the jury did not know that. They only saw a crying cop and a monster in orange." As the jury reached a verdict, the voice of Justice Langston boomed through the room. Langston was not like Judge Reyes. He was a federal appointee, a man with a face like a cliffside and eyes that had seen too much human darkness to be impressed by a dirty cop. He did not play golf with the mayor. He did not take envelopes. "We have, Your Honor." The jury foreman stood up. She was a middle-aged woman, a librarian, small and unassuming, exactly the kind of person Voss used to bully during traffic stops. Now she held his life in her hands. Voss gripped the edge of the defense table. His knuckles were white. His court-appointed lawyer, a public defender who clearly loathed him, did not even pat his arm for comfort. On count 1, racketeering and corruption under the RICO Act, the foreman read, her voice steady. "We find the defendant guilty." A murmur rippled through the room. Voss flinched as if he had been slapped. On count 2, possession of narcotics with intent to distribute, guilty. On count 3, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, guilty. On count 4, assault on a federal officer, guilty. The list went on. Counts, guilties. Each one was a nail in the coffin. By the time she finished, Voss's head was bowing lower and lower until his forehead was almost touching the table. He could not breathe. The air in the room felt thin, insufficient. Justice Langston adjusted his glasses and looked down at Voss. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the reporters in the back held their breath. Barrett Voss, the justice said. "Please stand." Voss tried. His legs felt like water. His lawyer had to hook a hand under his armpit and hoist him up. He stood swaying, the shackles around his ankles clanking, a sound that signaled his new reality. "In my years on the bench," Langston began, his voice low and dangerous, "I have seen murderers, terrorists, and cartel leaders. But I have rarely seen a man who so thoroughly delighted in the destruction of the innocent. You were given a badge, a symbol of public trust. You used it as a license to hunt. You destroyed lives not for safety, but for ego and greed. You are not a police officer, Mr. Voss. You are a predator." Voss opened his mouth to speak, to beg, to say something, but his throat was dry as dust. "The federal guidelines for these crimes are severe," Langston continued. "But given the sheer volume of your victims and the damage you have done to the public's faith in the law, I am departing upward from the guidelines." The justice leaned forward. "I sentence you to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. You will die in custody, Mr. Voss. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court has none." The gavel came down. Bang! It was the loudest sound Voss had ever heard. It rang in his ears like a gunshot. Life. He was middle-aged. He could live more years inside a cage. The transition from the courtroom to the transport van was a blur of rough hands and cold steel. The U.S. Marshals did not treat him with the professional courtesy usually reserved for former law enforcement. To them, he was worse than a criminal. He was a traitor to the badge. They tightened his handcuffs until they bit into the skin. They shoved him into the back of the armored van with a force that sent him stumbling against the metal bench. As the van rumbled out of the courthouse garage, Voss caught a glimpse of the world through the tiny, reinforced wire mesh window. He saw the sun shining on the pavement. He saw people walking their dogs, drinking coffee, laughing at phones. Normal life. A life that was continuing without him. A life he would never touch again. The drive took hours. They were heading to U.S.P. McCreary, a high-security federal penitentiary known as the Rock of the Mountains. It was where the system sent the guys who were too dangerous for regular prison, or the guys who were too hated to survive anywhere else. Voss sat alone in the cage, the vibration of the road rattling his teeth. His mind was racing, trying to formulate a plan. "I need to get to the Aryan Brotherhood," he thought, panic spiraling. "I need to pay for protection, but I have no money. The feds took it all. Maybe I can trade legal advice. Maybe I can trade secrets about the cartel busts I made." But deep down, he knew. In prison, a cop is the lowest form of life. A dirty cop who made headlines, he was a trophy. Every shank in the yard would be sharpening for him. The arrival at U.S.P. McCreary was a sensory assault. The massive steel gates groaned open. The looming guard towers silhouetted against the twilight sky looked like monsters. The van pulled into the sally port, and the airlock slammed shut behind them. "Get out. Move it. Fresh meat." Voss was hauled out. The air here smelled different, damp, stale, and laced with the chemical tang of fear. He was marched into processing. Strip. The command came from a guard who looked barely old enough to shave. Voss hesitated. "Look, son, I was a detective for years. I know the drill. Can we just—" "I said strip, inmate." The guard blasted him with pepper spray, just a burst to the chest, enough to choke him. Voss coughed, eyes watering, and clumsily stripped out of his orange court jumpsuit. He stood naked, shivering on the cold concrete floor, while 3 guards inspected him. They checked his mouth, his ears, under his arms. They made him squat, and cough. It was the ultimate degradation, the systematic stripping away of Barrett Voss, the man, leaving only the biological entity that the Bureau of Prisons now owned. They threw him a bundle of clothes, gray scrub pants, a gray t-shirt, cheap canvas shoes. They did not fit. Nothing here was made to fit. Name? The intake officer asked, not looking up from his computer. Voss Barrett. Wrong, the officer said. Your name is 98442. Memorize it. If you do not answer to it, you do not eat. Voss was holding his rolled-up mattress, waiting to be taken to his cell, when a senior correctional officer walked into the holding area. He had gold bars on his collar and a clipboard in his hand. Which one of you is Voss? Me, Voss said, stepping forward eagerly. That is me. Drop your gear. Warden wants to see you. A spark of hope ignited in Voss's chest. The warden. Of course. The warden was likely a former Fed or a state cop. There was a universal code, a thin blue line that extended even into hell. The warden would understand. The warden would know that putting Voss in general population was a death sentence. He was going to offer him administrative segregation, solitary confinement for his own protection. It would be lonely, but he would be safe. Voss followed the officer through the labyrinth of corridors. They passed cell blocks where inmates screamed and banged on the bars. They passed the chow hall that smelled of boiled cabbage. Finally, they reached the administration wing. It was quiet here, carpeted. The officer knocked on a heavy oak door. Enter. Voss was shoved inside. The door clicked shut behind him. The office was spacious, lined with books. Classical music played softly from a speaker. Behind a massive mahogany desk sat a man reading a file. Voss's file. Warden, Voss said, his voice trembling with relief. Thank you. Thank you for seeing me. You have no idea what it is like out there. They know who I am. If I go to Gen Pop, I am a dead man. The warden did not look up immediately. He slowly turned a page of the file. I know exactly who you are, inmate 098442. I have been following your career. Voss smiled nervously. I was a good cop, Warden. I got results. The media, they twisted things. You know how it is. The liberal press, the politics. I just did what had to be done to clean up the streets. The warden finally looked up. His eyes were pale blue, cold as glacier ice. There was no warmth in them, no camaraderie. To clean up the streets, the warden repeated softly. He closed the file and stood up, walking around the desk to lean against the front of it. He crossed his arms. Tell me, Barrett, do you remember a bust you made? A raid on a mechanic's shop on 4th Street. Voss frowned, his mind racing. He had done hundreds of raids. 4th Street, maybe. Was it the Disciples gang? No, the warden said. It was a solo mechanic, a kid named Elias Grant. The name hit Voss like a physical blow. The air left his lungs. He remembered. God, he remembered. It was a botched raid. Voss had received a bad tip. He kicked down the door, tore the place apart, and found nothing. But Voss never left empty-handed. It looked bad on the report. So he had pulled a baggie of crack cocaine from his stash, the same stash that had fallen out of his pocket in the courtroom, and tucked it into the young mechanic's toolbox. Elias Grant, Voss whispered. Elias was young, the warden said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He was working 2 jobs to pay for his fiancée's engagement ring. He had never touched a drug in his life. You planted ounces on him. You told him that if he did not confess to being a dealer, you would arrest his fiancée, too. Voss backed away, hitting the door. Warden, I did not know. Elias did not survive the county jail, the warden continued, taking a slow step toward Voss. He was a gentle soul. The animals in there broke him. He hanged himself with his bedsheet before his court date. The note he left said he could not live with the shame. Voss was shaking violently now. "Warden Grant, please." "That was a mistake. It was the job." "I am sorry. I am so sorry." "I am Thaddeus Grant," the warden said. "Elias was my little brother. I was working at a prison in Ohio when I got the call. I swore on his grave that I would find the man responsible. But you were powerful, Barrett. You were untouchable. So I waited. I worked my way up. I transferred to McCreary. And I waited for the day your arrogance would finally catch up with you." The warden smiled. It was a smile that promised pain. And then a sergeant major named Nia Caldwell did what the entire justice system could not do. She knocked you down, and she sent you to me. Voss fell to his knees. He clasped his hands together. "Please, just put me in the hole. Put me in the Sioux. Lock the door and throw away the key. I will never make a sound. Please do not let them kill me." "Kill you?" Thaddeus Grant laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Barrett, if you die, you escape. You do not get to escape." The warden walked back to his desk and pressed the intercom button. "Lieutenant, come in." The door opened and the senior officer stepped in. "The prisoner is requesting protective custody," the warden said, staring dead into Voss's eyes. "He believes his life is in danger." "Yes, sir," the lieutenant said. "Denied," the warden said. "Process him into C block, general population." Voss screamed. "No, C block is the cartel block. They will skin me alive." "Lieutenant," the warden added, ignoring Voss's scream, "send a message to the shot callers on C block. Tell them who is coming, and tell them that this man is mine. Tell them that if he dies, I will lock down the entire unit. No yard, no commissary, no visits. Tell them I want him alive. I want him to live a long, long time." The lieutenant nodded, understanding perfectly. "Understood, warden. The do not touch order. But accidents happen in the shower. Slips and falls." "Exactly," the warden said. "Just keep his heart beating." Two guards grabbed Voss by the arms. He kicked and thrashed, tears streaming down his face, snot running from his nose. "You cannot do this!" Voss shrieked. "This is illegal. I have rights. You have nothing." Warden Grant roared, his calm facade finally cracking to reveal the rage beneath. "You are not a cop anymore. You are not a man. You are property of the Bureau of Prisons. Get him out of my sight." They dragged Barrett Voss down the long concrete corridor towards C block. As they approached the heavy steel door, the noise from inside grew louder. It was a cacophony of shouting, heavy metal music, and the rhythmic thumping of fists on tables. The guards opened the door and shoved him inside. The noise stopped. Heads turned. The air in C block was thick with tension. Every pair of eyes locked onto the former detective. They saw the fear. They smelled it. A large man with tattoos covering his face stood up from a table near the entrance. He looked at the guards, then at Voss. "Warden says he breathes," the guard said to the tattooed man. "Everything else is up to you." The guard stepped back, and the heavy steel door slammed shut with a final, echoing clang. Voss stood alone in the center of the wolves. The tattooed man smiled, revealing gold teeth. He did not move to attack. He just pointed to a bucket and a mop in the corner. "Welcome home, detective," the man said softly. "The toilets are backed up. Start scrubbing." Barrett Voss, the man who had once owned the city, the man who had slapped a soldier and thought he was a god, picked up the mop. As he dipped it into the filthy water, a single tear fell from his cheek. He realized then that the knockout in the courtroom had not been the end. It was just the opening bell. The karma had not just hit back, it had moved in, and it was going to be his roommate for the rest of his life. The downfall of Detective Barrett Voss was not just a news story, it was a reckoning. The Hamilton 7 scandal resulted in the exoneration of wrongfully convicted men and women. The Hamilton County Police Department was completely restructured, with the Civilian Oversight Committee now led by none other than Sergeant Major Nia Caldwell, who retired from the Army to clean up her hometown. Cale Hayes finished his degree and became a paralegal, working alongside Preston Hale to help others who had been targeted by corrupt officers. And in the end, the story served as a brutal reminder. Power is not a license to abuse. The badge is a shield, not a sword. And if you swing that sword at the wrong person, especially a woman who has walked through the fire of war, you might just find that the universe swings back harder. Voss thought he was the apex predator, but he forgot the laws of physics. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. He gave a slap. He got a lifetime of darkness. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly why you never judge a book by its cover, and you never let power go to your head. Voss thought he was untouchable, but he found out the hard way that karma has a GPS, and it never misses an address. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button. It helps get these stories out to more people. And if you believe that justice should always be served, no matter who you are, type hard karma in the comments down below. I want to see how many of you are watching. Do not forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new story. We drop new drama every single week. Thanks for watching, and remember, be kind, be humble, or be ready for the knockout.